Welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast, where we learn about the ocean, swap sea stories, and explore our connection to the big blue. I'm your host, Gero. Let's dive into today's episode. Hey, has the ocean caught you in her net of wonder? Are you looking to be more involved without an expensive degree or career change? I've got you covered. Download my free guide, Be a Marine Biologist Without the Degree, and discover practical and fun ways to dive into science, make connections, and create your ocean journey starting today. Click the link in the show notes or visit my website, Karagracemuzia, that's KARAGRACEMUZIA.com to get your copy today. Again, link in the show notes or visit my website, and let's dive in. Hello, mermaids, pirates, ocean lovers, and land lubbers. Welcome to today's show. Question: what's the difference between a marine biologist and a dog? One tags a whale and the other wags a tail. How do dolphins and whales pass down and share knowledge through the generations? Via podcasts, naturally. Shane Gero is a marine biologist who studies whales. Growing up in Canada, nature captivated him at an early age, and a childhood love for orcas grew into a career studying their cousins, the sperm whale. In this episode, Shane shares his path to working with the whales in Dominica, how scientists are using groundbreaking AI techniques to decode whale speech, and why this research is so vitally important. We chat about how listeners can be involved in whale research, no career change required. Shane also has one of the most magical answers I've ever heard to the field story question at the end of the episode, so be sure to stay tuned for that. Please enjoy. Shane, welcome to the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm excited to be here.
So, could you explain who the 7 are and why they're so important in your life?
Yeah, so I've had the huge privilege of spending a large amount of time with sperm whale families, and one of them we call the Group of 7. They got that name in part because a little Canadian art history never hurt anybody, but also because there were 7 animals when we met this family. We've spent more time with these sperm whales than probably anyone has with any other sperm whales in the world, and they've been great ambassadors, sort of teaching us all the minutiae of what it means to live a life of a sperm whale in the Caribbean Sea. So they're like my other family, you know. I have my human family here in Canada, and then all the whale families in Dominica.
I have no idea what the 7 is in reference to Canadian art history. What is that?
Well, there's a group of famous. Yes, I'm sorry. It's all the Canadians are laughing right now. There's a group of famous Canadian painters called the Group of 7.
Okay. And
they produced a lot of often very nature focused art that's in all of the important Canadian art museums. So it was funny when, a group of Canadians were on a small boat starting to do research in the Caribbean, and we, spent over a month with this one family. We just started calling them the Group of 7.
I love that. That's a great story. Thank you. I'm going to have to look that up now.
Yeah.
So how does a Canadian get down to Dominica and study whales? What does that path look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both typical and atypical. I think every kid at some point between being 6 and 12 falls in love with nature, whether it's rocks or birds or dirt, worms, whatever it may be, either because they have some experience with it or they can't believe the sort of magical powers that they have, like squirrels running on treetops or whales holding their breath or birds flying, right? It's just awe-inspiring. And I'm still that kid. Like, I wanted to be a marine biologist from when I was little. And, I did the things that you might expect. So I spent a lot of time, trying to be smart in school and get good grades to go to a university where I could study to be a marine biologist. Because I grew up in Ottawa, which it's on a river, but not anywhere near the ocean. I don't have this I walked on the beach and saw a dolphin and that was my life, right? Like, that's not the story. But I think, in Canada, you kind of go to one coast or the other. We have one of the longest coastlines in the world. And so I had the huge opportunity of working with Hal Whitehead at Dalhousie University on the east coast of Canada. And he was one of the first people to study sperm whales in the wild continuously. And he's a mathematician, and he kind of liked math and sailing and brought those two things together to study whales. And I really liked studying how animals spend time with each other and with who they spend time and what they say when they spend time with each other. Jane Goodall was a hero of mine, and she looked at how individual animals are and who they are and how they live their life. And that's what I wanted to do with sperm whales, which was challenging at the time because, they're big ocean nomads. And so being able to follow individuals across time hadn't really been done until we started the Dominica Sperm Whale Project in 2005.
Yeah. Why marine biology? We're going to take it all the way back. Like, what sparked that interest?
I don't know. I think it's this amazing divide between above the surface and below the surface. It's like parallel worlds almost. Mm-hmm. It's like going to the upside down in Stranger Things or something. Like, it's just you go through this portal to a totally different world. Because I think as kids, you can look up in the sky and see stars, or like the moon is the best PR agent for hiring NASA engineers that you can have. Like, everyone can see it no matter where you are in the world, right? But seeing deep sea hydrothermal vents or where sperm whales go when they hold their breath is just a lot more of a mystery. Even now, humanity has explored just a tiny fraction of the ocean, no matter how technologically advanced we are. So I think it was just this amazing thing. But also, killer whales have this really prominent place in Canadian culture, especially on the West Coast. They're very emblematic and this crazy black and white animal that really shouldn't exist. And so the Vancouver Aquarium had a lot of prominence in Canada as a kid, even though I didn't grow up in Vancouver. So I think that was it. My favorite animal when I was a kid was a killer whale. That's just how it was. So the idea of becoming a marine biologist seemed like an extension of that. And I guess I had really supportive parents and, all of the opportunity along the way.
So you started studying sperm whales in your undergrad, or was that further along in your
No,
education?
I mean, I went to Dalhousie for all the reasons that people pick schools in that, it was in Canada, but not at home. They had offered me a scholarship. My friends were going there, like kind of the normal decision making. But I knew that there was this whale lab there, and I really wanted to. I did all of the things you could possibly do to get into the lab. In that, I applied to do some data management work, and then that parlayed into an opportunity to do my honors there, which was actually on bottlenose dolphins, like the flipper style dolphin, from the west coast of Australia. And that project too was very focused on individuals, and all the animals had names and they knew the families because they had been studying them since the early 80s. And then I applied for a scholarship basically to do my graduate work with Hal. But that's where the Dominica Sperm Whale Project really started, because I wanted to study baby sperm whales and what it meant to grow up in an ocean nomadic family. And most of the work that Hal had pioneered on sperm whales was in the Galapagos in the Pacific. And the sperm whales there, although we didn't know at the time, were just much more nomadic. They were covering 2,000 kilometers for them was not unheard of. But also there just weren't a lot of babies. I think in part because we whaled so much more heavily in the Pacific Ocean, so there were just fewer bigger males there. But we had heard a rumor from some early work in the Caribbean that there were lots of sperm whale babies there. So we went and applied to do work in a number of islands in the Caribbean, and Dominica approved our permit first. And when we went, that was the goal, was to study how are sperm whale babies cared for, what does nursing look like, all these things that we weren't able to answer elsewhere. I'd love to tell you that it's my acumen as a biologist that turned that 1-year master's into a long-term 20-year project. But I think the reality is that we found a community of sperm whales that were easier to study. For the Caribbean whales, moving 200, 300 kilometers is a big move as compared to the thousands of kilometers in the Pacific. And that allows us to see the same whale this week and next month and next year, which allows us to look at a much better picture of who they are, right? If you and I only ever meet today, I'm hardly going to know who you are. But if I, follow your life and write what you're doing down and see you week on week, month after month, I start to get a better picture of who you are, who you're friends with, who your family is. And the whales have given us that gift in the Caribbean.
Why do you think there's such a disparity between how much they migrate in the Pacific versus the families that are in the Caribbean?
I mean, fundamentally, it's differences in culture, right? In that, humans are all humans globally, but, I eat with a fork and not chopsticks because of where I was born and who I grew up learning from. My grandmother's grandmother ate with a fork. And so those differences happen because they're learnt and passed on through generations. In the case of sperm whales, of strong female leaders, right? It's grandmothers, mothers, and daughters that live together for life. One of the things we've shown in the Caribbean is that individual sperm whale families have preferences for islands, even though there's good habitat all the way up and down the island chain in the Caribbean. So why is that? Well, probably because their grandmother's grandmother knows how to use all the little nooks and crannies off Dominica, and those are different than Martinique. And so there are other sperm whale families that use the islands farther south or farther north, but the families that use Dominica prefer Dominica. And it's not because the species of squid are different. It's not because the ocean is dramatically different. It's just where they came from and where they grew up. And that creates this link, right, between the place in the ocean with where they grew up and the animals that live there today. That can't be solved from genetics or, ecosystems perspective, but it's an entirely different one, which is about their culture and who they are.
Your research started with bottlenose dolphins and looking at the individual, and it's continued into sperm whales and also looking at the individual. Why is it so important to give them names and look at who they are?
Yeah, well, I think the naming is a couple of things. One is we never thought the names would suddenly be on podcasts, and so there's an animal named Fruit Salad, and it has that name because in the very first year that we met it, we're like, oh, that's the animal that we saw 3 hours ago when we were eating the fruit salad, and then it just kind of stuck. It was a shorthand for us to remember who they are, right? But I think it's important in that the way that people acknowledge that your dog, Tegan, is different from all other dogs of the same breed, the name is a shorthand for how individually important that animal is and how they're not replaceable by just any other, arguably genetically similar animal. And so when Fingers in the group of 7 dies, she can't be replaced by Pinchy just because she's another female in the same family. That part of their family is gone, and whatever that meant to each of them is gone too. And so, yeah, I mean, that's how they live. They live in these small families of about 7 animals, and each of them is important. And that includes the babies too. And so when a young female doesn't survive, you lose the potential of that being the next female elder that leads the family. So, yeah, I mean, we often get questioned in terms of why do some of them have silly names, or why do you give them names? And I think some people might accuse us of being anthropomorphic in that giving them names makes them be treated more like people. But I think, the science has progressed to the point where these are big-brained, complex mammals, whose brains evolved to have complex thought. And just because our science finds it really, really hard to show things like theory of mind, or I know that you know things, or common values like equity, or things like that they're now showing in some primates, in some monkeys, doesn't mean that we can't do our science assuming some of those things are true, and therefore test what we would expect if that is the case, right? And if you just spend time with them, you realize that they're unique individuals. So, you can't treat them interchangeably.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's really what science is, right? I have a thought. Is it true? Can I ask this question and prove it to be true? And that's observation. And kids are really good at that. They're full of questions. And I always say that like they're the original scientists. And then some people kind of grow out of it. And the ones that are in the science field still are just the kids that never grew out of it.
Yeah, and I think for sure that's true for a lot of marine biologists. Because I feel like many, many people want to be marine biologists when they're little. I think that's absolutely true. And I think my point about that is, we know that one comes before two, that it's really, really hard to test for three. But therefore, what does four look like is a fair scientific question. It's going to be really, really hard to get inside animals' minds. Even in captivity, when we can teach chimpanzees sign language or English with a keyboard, it's really, really hard to ask them questions about thinking. But their behavior, what they do, is quite clearly involves complex thought. Animals can remember each other across decades. They can remember sequences of events. They can remember story orders of things. Or if this was true, then this must be true. So, if we assume those to be true in a sperm whale, what do we expect their behavior to be? What do we expect them to do? And I think that's a much more honest way of doing science than assuming that, if they see the color green, they will always do X just because there's some animal that we haven't shown complex thought in.
Yeah. Individual sperm whales are identified by their flukes, and I think that's the case across almost all whale groups. Can you, like if you're out in the field, can you pick them out?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I'd say like maybe the most common 100, 150 animals we can recognize in the field. And some of them now we can start to recognize acoustically. So, Fingers, for example, has a coda that predominantly she makes when you're with the group of seven. So you can be like, oh, that's Fingers over there. So, yeah, I mean, in many ways, they're sort of like coworkers in that, like, one of the most exciting things is every season to go back down and see, who's grown up or who's had a new baby or, is that old lady still around. That's led to some tragedy, too, in that there was a lot of calves dying for a number of years, and we didn't know why. And so we were losing a lot of little ones that we thought we would know for our whole life. And over the 20 years, we've lost a number of the elder females as well, both to things that are our fault, like being hit by ships or entangled in fishing gear, but also because likely of natural causes, reasons we don't know, that they're just gone.
So really quickly before I dive into the next point I want to cover, a coda is how the whales talk, right? That's their clicks. I mean, in sperm whales, it's really just sounds like a bunch of like really loud clicks. In dolphins, there's like more popping noises. Is that kind of the same, or is that dialect dependent depending on where you are in the world with which type of whales?
Yeah, I mean, unsurprisingly, every species of whale and dolphin has their own communication system, right? So lots of people know humpback whale song, even if you've only just watched Finding Nemo. Like it's pretty ubiquitous. Roger Payne, who was an advisor on Project SETI, which is the large research program that I work in now, helped to discover humpback whale song, and that triggered one of the largest environmental movements of our time, right? The Save the Whale. It became new age music. When we made one golden record to send out on Voyager 1 and we had to choose sounds that characterize our planet, we put humpback whale song on that record, right? Everyone knows humpback whale song. And bottlenose dolphins, you're right, they have a lot of squeaky whistles that change in pitch, rather than just clicking noises. But sperm whales speak in clicks, and they make rhythmic patterns of clicks that are varied between, 2 to all the way up to about 40 different clicks long. And they vary in rhythm, click, 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 or click, 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 click. But they also vary in timing, so they slow them down and speed them up by even keeping the same rhythm. Sometimes they add an extra click at the end, and we call that ornamentation. So there's lots of complexity to those clicks. it's one of those things that seems really simple initially. Like it's just a base Morse code and there must be this many things and that code's for everything they need. But actually we're finding more and more complexity in each click and in each coda, the more ways that we look at them. So it's probably a very expressive system, but we're only starting to really understand it.
Yeah. So we've kind of hinted at it a couple of times already, but the giant big project that you're working on is Project Sadie, which is cetacean, translation initiative, which is amazing. So it's the whole idea of actually trying to understand what these whales are saying. How did this idea come about and what does that look like?
Yeah, well, so we've been studying the communication system of sperm whales for a while in Dominica. And I think people have been thinking about what animals' sounds mean for hundreds of years. Like, I think it's one of these foundation questions. And I met David Gruber, who's the founder of SETI, a number of years ago now. And he sort of said, well, why don't we bring together, these people that I know who are expert computer scientists in machine learning, natural language processing, robotics, cryptography, all these really cool fields and set them to these questions that are sort of fundamental in the sperm whale communication system. And that was where SETI was born, basically at a meeting in Harvard in 2019. And, it basically asks, what if we listen intently enough to someone who's fundamentally different from us and see what we can learn from that, right? And what's so important to sperm whales that they might want to talk about it with each other. And I think that's the foundation of Project SETI. This idea eventually of some kind of two-way interaction isn't really the driver from my perspective. I think it's more that, what might we learn if we listen to someone so fundamentally different from us and apply all these amazing technologies we've built to study human languages to asking similar questions about sperm whales.
So, have you figured out how to say, giant squid over there, let's go get it?
Well, I think what we figured out quite readily is that there's a lot more expressivity than we knew even 3 years ago, right? So there's a lot more variability and potential place for them to encode differences. How in some languages you can say the word and some languages you say word, and those have different meanings. We're finding frequency information. We're finding information in how the animals overlap when they talk with each other. When you apply these pattern finding technologies, machine learning and neural networks, you suddenly find a lot more interesting patterns, right? Yeah. So it's not just who's saying what. The what has dramatically expanded, and the where they are and when they are and what they're doing when they make those sounds is the step that we're at now, right? So a recent paper put out by a PhD student named Patricia out of MIT last year was able to sort of predict what codas would come next, sort of in the same way that you type on your phone and you start typing your text and it guesses what's going to come next. That's what we're doing with sperm whale conversations now. But what's really interesting is just like if you start a text message just with the word I, the next three guesses that your phone's going to make is probably wrong because it could say, you could start pretty much any sentence with the word I. We're finding that with the sperm whale codas, you need about 30 seconds before it gets getting good. Which means it's not just that A follows B, follows C, follows D. It's that there's some level of complexity in there that the model has to figure out before it predicts it well. And we can start predicting behavior. So if we hear these things, then we know what's going to happen next, what the animals are going to do next. And I think that's where you start getting at the models that allow you to get to the really cool question at the end, which is the why are they making these sounds? If you can predict who's going to say what and when and what's going to happen after, then the why comes last. And I think that gets really exciting.
Yeah. What does the science behind this really look like? I know you're going out and tagging the whales, you're getting these recordings, so you're actually out in the field. Obviously, there's this huge component of data analysis and using AI to help with this. What is the big loop? How does this look? Yeah,
well, so I think the first several years of SETI, we're developing new hardware and then software to record sperm whales in an unparalleled sense, right? So if you're trying to learn English and you're an alien, and you only record with one microphone in a dentist's office, you're going to think the word root canal is critically important to English-speaking society, even though actually it's a pretty niche word, right? So in order to get out of that dentist's office problem, we need to record more across different behaviors, across different times of year, across different depths. And so that does involve different tools. It involves long-term recording buoys. It involves what are called gliders, which are sort of autonomous little submarines that are silent, that can stay out for a month and move around and follow the whales, and little computers that we put on the whales with suction cups. And all of those needed to be iterated and improved. How we put them out has been improved. We used to put out computer tags with long poles and little boats that got close to the whales. And now we're working on an autonomous drone that can find the whales, deploy the tag on its own. So a lot of these are technologies that need to be iterated multiple times, right? And so that's why it's been amazing to work with the engineers at the Harvard Microrobotics Lab, because it's not like me as a biologist have to pretend to know how to build these things. I'm working with some of the world's greatest roboticists and engineers, you know? And the same when we collect the audio. So when we're out there deploying tags, recording the whales, it still involves a lot of boat time. Mm-hmm. So it's still the biologist on the boat, taking pictures of the whales, recording, deploying the technology. And that's, of course, what all the biologists live for, is to be out on the boat, right?
Yes.
But in reality, as with all science, you get off the boat, you come back, and there's all this data to process. And I think the computer scientists have really augmented our capacity in so many different ways. Not only finding the whales or recording the whales, but how we process that data. And I think that's the bigger leap that needs to be done, right? I think with, technology getting smaller and smaller, like your iPhone, the ability to collect large-scale data is increasingly more simple, right? Whether you're in a rainforest or underwater. Mm-hmm. But there's two ways that things like neural networks or AI or machine learning, whatever buzzword you want to use, can help. One is very applied. So when you have hundreds and hundreds of hours, where are the sperm whale sounds? Right? That's called detection. And that's something that neural networks are really great at. And it means that I don't have to have students or myself sit down and listen to the 100 hours again and be like, oh, the codas are here at hour 10. So that's an amazing process, because it used to take us about 8 to 12 minutes per minute of recording to extract the audio before we could do science with the communication, right? And the second way that AI is really being helpful is looking at these patterns. So the dependency across long time, right? They make some sounds over here, and then something happens over here. Traditionally, that's been a really hard connection to make. But ultimately, that's what a lot of these types of models are patterns across time. And so it's not only just the very applied solutions of making our jobs easier, mm-hmm. But it's also enabling us to ask these bigger questions.
Yeah, it's a really good point. So I watched some videos of your fieldwork in action, and you have a drone that goes and does the tagging for you, which I have gone out with my friend that does manta ray research, and we put a drone in the air, and we have to find the manta ray, and then we have to get the boat close enough and angle it upstream from where the manta ray is swimming, and then we have to get in the water and try to get the belly shot of the manta and then deploy a tag manually. So to watch this drone drop on a whale and deploy a tag was absolutely fascinating. What does the tag look like? Is it actually going into the skin, or is it suction cup? Do you use what are you using? What technology is that?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot going on there, right? First of all, the drones are built from scratch, so there's the engineering on what's going on there, and it's based on the racing drones. I don't know if you haven't seen it before, Google drone racing. It's the most insane thing ever. But it means that they're relatively low-cost drones. But it means that the pilot skill initially has to be good when you're training these drones, right? But now we have ones that will fly autonomously, that have cameras that can detect whales. So that's computer vision, right? It's where the computer is reading the live video feed and saying, okay, here's the whale. And then it's saying, okay, well, this is the blowhole and that's the flukes. So that's the front of the whale. So I want to get up by the nose. And then you can essentially draw a box and say, put the tag there. And it will track the whale and slowly come down and put it on. So that technology is unbelievable, right? But a lot of our tags are still put out by piloted drones because both have different benefits. Then the tag goes on with 4 suction cups, and it's about the size of a shoe. And those suction cups will stay for a certain amount of time, and then there's a little bit of wire that melts by being in the salt water. And then when that melts away, it opens the suction cups, and the suction cup releases, and then the tag floats to the surface. And the computer tag is, measures movement in 3 dimensions. It measures sound on 3 different microphones, which are called hydrophones underwater. Temperature, depth, all sorts of great environmental stuff. So it really gives you the whole context of the conversations that you're recording. And we know which whale it's going on, both because you can increasingly identify the animals by from the drone itself, but mostly we still have people on the boat, taking pictures of the tails, because when sperm whales dive, they lift their tail out of the water in that kind of quintessential whale watch moment, and then we take pictures. But then we use a platform called Flukebook, that uses computer vision again to detect the flukes and match them to the animals that we know. And in fact, your listeners, if they go whale watching anywhere in the world, you can go to flukebook.org and match your pictures against sperm whales and other species from all over the
I did see that, and I love that citizen science component, that people can actually get involved and upload their stuff. And yeah, because people want to get involved and they want to help, and they don't necessarily need to do a career change to help. They can go on a whale watching boat and take some awesome pictures and then be like, look, I'm helping.
No, I mean, in that sense, whale biology is made that much more powerful by lawyers and bus drivers and school teachers and whoever it is that happens to be on holiday, because it happens all the time that someone out on a trip, on their vacation somewhere, takes a picture of a whale that hasn't been seen in 12 years and has moved and is now some big movement record. Those kinds of things happen all the time. That's why the platform was built. No one research program based anywhere in the world can study whales over the range that they live their lives. And so it's a really collaborative thing, especially the photo ID, because that's something everyone can do with their phones now.
Yeah. It really kind of brings that shared stewardship into play. I like that a lot. What is the deepest depth that you've recorded on these computers that are attached to the whale's back?
So in Dominica, we've seen 1,150 meters. So that's over 3,000 feet. But that's not the record for sperm whales. So other people have tagged sperm whales elsewhere in the world where they've gone down to 1,800 and something, nearly 2 kilometers down. And then there was some early work which was done differently. They basically had a little bit of metal on the whale, and then they would ping it with sonar. And there was estimates below 2,000 meters, but that hasn't been recreated, I don't think, in modern computer tags. So these whales are diving very deep, but they're not the world's deepest diver. There are these other whales called Cuvier's beaked whales, and they've gone down to over 3 kilometers down. So that's 9,000 feet deep. And they can hold their breath for 2 hours or longer. So they're not the deepest or longest divers, but they're right up there. There's not a lot of animals that leave the surface and go that deep.
Right, and they're still gone for an hour, right?
Yeah, the average dive is about 50 minutes, but we've recorded them longer than that, right? So if anyone snorkels or does free diving, you realize that that's a pretty huge number.
Well, they got some big lungs, too.
Yeah, well, they have years of, millions of years of evolution to allow for it, right? Their blood is different than ours. Their muscle holds more oxygen. There's lots of things that they do, or their body has evolved to do, that you can't really just draw a comparison.
Right. Could you explain the significance of that giant melon? And I have to start with, my daughters have a Dr. Seuss book, and it was written by marine scientists, and it's like it's the whale one, and I love it, and it's hilarious. But in it, they have a they have a sperm whale, and it's like the size of a Jeep. The head is the size of a Jeep you could fit, and my next door neighbors have a Jeep. So I'm like, look, we could fit Mr. Roland's Jeep inside this whale's head. That's how big it is. And
Yeah.
my girls' minds are just mind blown.
Yeah.
So could you explain like the physiology behind that and why it's so important and why they evolved to have that?
Totally. Yeah. So first of all, that probably speaks to the size of a male's head. And I have the same book, and I've often gone, well,
there's a caveat here.
So this is that's like an extremely large male. And for an extremely large male, they might get up to 18 to 20 meters long. So that's the length of like 1.5 to 2 school buses, right? And these animals might weigh as much as 10 of those school buses. A third of that in the males can be their nose, their head. And it's evolved to be, one of the most powerful, the most powerful natural sonar system, right? It's what allows them to exploit the deep, dark part of the ocean. Most of the world's oceans are dark. The sunlight from the sun never gets there. And so these are animals that find food by using echolocation. Some people know bats do the same thing. They make a sound, it bounces off their food. And so a huge part of their head is dedicated to the sound-producing structures. It's also where they get their name. They have this big cavity in their head called the spermaceti organ, and that's where spermaceti whale, and then shortened to sperm whale, came from. And that's the oil that the whalers were after. They were, for years we killed whales, sperm whales specifically, to harvest the oil in their noses. And that lubricated machinery, it burnt our lamps. I mean, it powered our economy before modern fossil fuels did. And so what they use it for is essentially a key sort of lens in their acoustic flashlight, so to speak, right? So they make a sound through these little mouth-looking things at the front of their head called the phonic lips. And if anyone's ever inflated a balloon and pulled the mouth tight and it kind of makes that farty noise, it makes that farty noise because the two sides of the balloon are slapping together. And that's how the phonic lips work. They move air through the phonic lips, and that makes this sort of slapping sound, which is a click. And that travels back through the spermaceti organ and kind of gets amplified and directionalized. And it comes back forward through another organ called the junk, because it was named by the whalers. And it has more divisions, so it was harder to get the oil out, and so they just called it the junk. And when the sound comes out, it's one of the most powerful natural sounds on the planet. They're not the loudest animal like you might see on Google sometimes, but they're up there. And so that allows them to point this really sort of bright sound flashlight into the darkness and find their food. And it's also what allows us to find them. Most of the time when we leave from shore to find the sperm whales, we don't see a sperm whale first. We hear them. And then we track the sound to get close to them before we actually see them at the surface. Because they're down there making clicks in the dark for 45 minutes, 50 minutes every hour, and only at the surface with us for about 10 minutes.
Right. As you were talking, again, Finding Nemo comes to mind. The second one with the beluga whale, and then he's got like the melon where he's echolocating and like trying to find everybody. So, similar concept, right? Different sound, similar concept.
Well, that they also have what you would call a melon in beluga or the bottlenose dolphins. All of the whales that have teeth have the ability to echolocate, and they have that because they have these sound-making systems in their head. It's just with the sperm whale, it went to an extreme because they're these deep water foragers, and so they want to be able to sort of see farther and therefore be louder. Dolphins, killer whales, all of the whales that have teeth will echolocate in the same way.
Yeah. Take me to a field day. You're looking for whales. You're dropping a hydrophone in the water in order to hear them. Is that how you locate them?
Yeah, we have a special one that we pull behind the boat that has multiple hydrophones built into it. And then we have a computer program that can kind of estimate the angle, sort of like turn left 40 degrees, like that kind of information. So that means that we can keep moving while listening at the same time. And that's a huge asset.
Yeah, that's really helpful to be able to cut out the motor and the wake noise and actually be able to
make progress. Exactly, yeah. You can do it by basically putting, a microphone in a plastic bag and put a salad bowl on a stick, and that should be able to give you the sort of directional hydrophone that you need. It doesn't have to be technically complicated. This, for us who do it professionally, it makes it a lot easier to have a complicated system that you pull behind the boat.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. And saltwater is very corrosive. And I think about that with any equipment, let alone these computers that you're attaching to the whales that are diving down. Not only do they have to withstand highly corrosive environment, but now they're under extreme pressure diving to over 1,000 meters.
Right. It'll crush a lot of things. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the fun kind of off-spins of SETI is that it turns out that waterproofing drones is exceptionally complicated. And it's one of these bits of technology that just needed to come along. The team at Harvard has really been leading in that respect too. So you want to use a drone in the ocean? Cool. Okay, great. So you either lose them all the time because they get wet, or you create a drone that can fly and also land on water and not get destroyed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I've done my own sperm whale research because they're a source of fascination for me. And by my own research, I mean just complete desk jockey or watching documentaries. And I've heard them referred to as cachalots or cachalos. Where does anybody refer to them as that, outside of these couple little articles that I'd seen?
I mean, not really in English.
Okay.
So in French, they're cachalot, which
okay.
literally means hide in the water, if you speak French.
Yeah.
But that's not where it comes from. It comes from the Spanish or Portuguese for cachalote, which is similar, but it doesn't actually mean hide in the water. So that's just a good coincidence. And the Germans also use a pottwal, like the pot-headed whale.
Okay.
So the common names for species all over the world are different. I think it's particularly glaring if you're a birder. Then,
yes.
When you go to a global conference, everyone has to make sure they know what bird you're talking about. And that's true in whales and dolphins, too. And in fact, the Latin name, so every species on the planet has a very fancy Latin 2-word name for it so that it's unique. But the sperm whale one was argued for a long time, until the 80s or maybe even into the 90s. But now it's pretty much settled. No.
What was it argued between?
So Physeter macrocephalus, which means blower with a big head. That's the one that won out. And Physeter catodon, which was actually, it was 2 discoveries of sperm whales by the same person in different years, and they hadn't realized. And so it was which one did they use first? It was a bit of a cool history. If you're really nerdy and into sperm whales, the history of why that argument happened. But otherwise, it's just a scientific artifact. Now it's pretty much defined. But no, generally, we call sperm whales. They have an unfortunate common name, I suppose. But people often ask, why is it called a sperm whale? But I would say one do-out for everyone who's really curious, rather than me give the answer, is go and read about it on the internet. The Wikipedia page is actually pretty good about explaining where that came from and why the sailors used that term and how the oil got named that and therefore the whale.
Perfect. Little extra research for everybody.
Yeah, it's a fun one.
Awesome. When I was researching you, I came across the moth project, the More Than Human. And I thought that was a really interesting way to kind of connect your work and then bring it out into, policy. Could you kind of explain what that looks like and what the Moth Project is?
Yeah, so the More Than Human Rights Project is a large program that's primarily driven by this amazing lawyer named Cesar. He met David a number of years ago, and there was a lot of synergy in terms of what SETI was doing in trying to understand what's so important to other animals. Conservation is often very human-focused, so we think about it as protected areas and protected species, but really conservation is about changing people's perceptions and changing people's behavior or goals in order to allow for space to coexist for the animals. And you can take lots of different approaches on that. You can protect ecosystems. This whole area is protected. You can protect species. All of the landings turtles in Ontario are protected. Or you can protect individuals. right? Which is, you see that a lot now with animal personhood arguments, like this chimpanzee or this elephant goes to court for its own personal rights. I don't want to speak for Moth, but I think their perspective is that there's a lot of legal ramifications of what we already know about the more than human world, because we're not completely distinct, right? And we tend to think of ourselves that way. We're very anthropocentric in that we think about humans as the middle of everything and the best at everything. When in reality, we're just one solution to the problem of how to survive in the world that we all live in. Cesar and David and some other people on SETI and some other lawyers have been doing a lot of thinking about how the work that we've done in SETI and before has implications to policy, right? And that includes things like shipping noise in terms of how we conserve species. One of the things that I've been arguing for a very long time is that the additional level that we should be protecting is at the level of species cultural diversity, and that cultural diversity needs to be a part of what we define as biodiversity, and that, species survive because of the lessons they got from their grandmother, which aren't encoding in your genetics, right? Like if you took someone from downtown Manhattan and put them in the Amazon, just because people have been living in the Amazon for thousands of years doesn't mean that person would survive, right? Because despite the genetics of being a human, which have been very successful, how to live in downtown Manhattan is just different than how you live and succeed in the deepest parts of the Amazon. And so we know that that's true for whales too, especially sperm whales. And that can be an underpinning for large-scale conservation policy. So if you map all of the world's sperm whale cultures, that's a really much better framework to define conservation units than the genetics of sperm whales. Because sperm whales are sperm whales globally. But we know the sperm whales in the Caribbean are uniquely different than those in the Gulf of Mexico or the Azores or the Sargasso or the Mediterranean or Sri Lanka or everywhere else that sperm whales are. And so if you lose those Caribbean whales, you lose the cultural link between place and people, or place and animals. And that can't be collected back quickly just because a few whales from the Azores swims into the Caribbean to take up that part of the habitat, because they will have been taught differently from different grandmothers. And so as a result, that part of the ocean is less useful. So that's how you translate what whales are saying to how it matters in terms of legal human conservation policy, right? Because we know that whales identify themselves as belonging to clans, and those clans have different cultural behaviors, and that impacts their survival, we can create a map that we can then use in large-scale conservation policy like, the IWC, the International Whaling Commission, or International Species at Risks, these kind of things.
Beautiful. It's a really cool way to work together and kind of getting that word out there and bringing the science out of the science and into the world.
Well, look, science doesn't happen in a vacuum, like I am a scientist, but I'm also a person, like I vote in elections and have passions and, want to park near my schools and those kinds of things. But also, I think when you spend a huge amount of time with wildlife, not to compare myself to an astronaut, but like you get a different perspective on the planet than when you are in the human world the whole time. Right. And I think that's why why the Moth Project is so interesting, because if we're going to affect change in the same way that Project SETI is addressing its science by saying, look, we need computer scientists and roboticists and engineers and acousticians to look at some interesting biology questions. Moth is sort of saying, like, if we're going to affect change in the oceans, for example, you don't just need marine biologists, you need lawyers and you need business people and everybody. And those changes can happen faster with better awareness in each of those places. And that's delivered better by the expertise in each of those areas. I always feel a lot of sympathy for the linguist on Project SETI, because animal linguistics is a much more sort of bleeding edge world than the idea of studying animal communication. but he's amazing. This amazing professor by the name of Gasper at Berkeley, and asking these questions around vowels or phonology in whales, which never would have been asked 5 years ago.
Can't wait to see how far this goes and how quickly it gets there. I mean, it just seems like it's leaps and bounds at this point, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a huge honor to work with all these people. I don't have to be a biologist who pretends to learn machine learning. I say I have this problem that would be well solved with machine learning, and then speak to the world experts on machine learning, right? So there's no doubt that that's been an amazing adventure. And I think what's been really exciting is to see how much everyone is keen. I feel like it's really pulling out that 7-year-old in everyone. Maybe it's not sperm whales, maybe your passion was squirrels or whatever it may be, but everyone at one point has seen something and gone, wow, what is that bird saying to that other bird? Because it looks real upset, and that there's these amazing stories happening with our neighbors in our backyard, whether we live next to the ocean or not. And what if we just stopped and paid attention for a little while? What we might learn about what it means to be a good neighbor.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm a huge advocate. I tell people all the time, just go spend outside. You want to help save the world, just go actually spend some time outside observing the world, and that's where you start. One thing you mentioned earlier was that you noticed there was a period of several years that the babies were dying, the sperm whales that you were studying were dying. Is that still happening? I know I heard on other podcasts that you were on, it was like 1 in 3. Is that still the same statistic?
Well, so we're redoing the new science now. So that work was between 2010, basically, and 2016. Okay. So to add an equivalent amount of time after that, it's only kind of coming out to now. So we're doing the science now. Anecdotally, it does seem like the babies are doing better in that, like, when babies are born, we're seeing them year after year. But there is still quite a high death rate in the adults, and we're not really sure why. It could be many, many things. It could also just be a generational change, right? Like, this could be the 10 years when, that generation time is up, right? And we haven't been following them for 60, 100 years to see those generation booms. In the same way that we talk about boomers and Gen X's and, millennials and so on. There's probably generational gaps like that in wildlife too, but we just don't know for the sperm whales.
Yeah. And so their lifespan is 60 to 100 years?
Yeah, it seems to be. I mean, we have a few animals now that we photo identified back to 1984. That's the oldest we have photographed. But there's definitely animals that are older than them. So, and that was also estimated from old whaling data when you could sort of ground truth how old the whales were.
So at the end of each episode, I have a series of questions I like to ask.
Okay.
You ready?
Yeah.
So often in this field, you can kind of get jaded, right? Like, there's so much that you see, especially like watching baby whales die. You can just kind of see a lot of the worst. How do you keep the hope?
So many ways. I keep the hope in that when I go back, the whales are there. We may have lost some, but they're still there. They're there right now as we're talking, loving each other and finding food and swimming around the ocean. So I find hope in the responsibility of acting on their behalf and on our side of the surface. I find hope in the fact that, people like yourselves write to us and are excited about the work we're doing and wanting to share that with the rest of the world. And I think SETI especially has captured something in people's imagination about what we're all doing here and maybe why we, in the broadest sense, are all on this planet together. I think a message of listening to our neighbors and learning why it matters to them and how that matters to us is probably more important now than any time in my human existence. So I think there's lots of ways I still find hope, for sure. We live in a very beautiful and awe-inspiring place, and I think we sometimes forget that when we focus just on what humans are doing.
If you were given a blank check, unlimited funding for any project or projects up to 3, what would you use the money for? I
mean, like, in sperm whale stuff? Because, like, there's lots of good things about peace
project
and
or
hunger.
Projects up to 3.
Man. I mean, I think we're far from having a blank check for sure, but I think this is pretty much the peak of everything I thought we could possibly do in terms of sperm whale research. We're doing some really exciting science. But I'd be remiss to say that we're not living in the era of a climate crisis, and clearly there's lots of human conflict in the world today. So I think I would have to spend that blank check there too.
What is your favorite field story or stories to tell? And this could be an amazing day out in the field where just everything went right and it was magic and unicorns, or it could be a day where things happened and it just makes a really great story now.
I mean, 2 years ago, we were so lucky that we were there when an animal named Rounder gave birth. And she gave birth like within 150 meters of the boat at the most. And then proceeded to like, her whole family just sort of, swam the baby right past the boat. It's hard for me to explain the impact that had, in that, we could wait 20 more years and never see another sperm whale birth. But for it to happen in that family, in a calf that we've known since it was a calf, is pretty remarkable. I think that day just spoke to how grateful I am to be able to do this work, to be there for such a huge gift to see it happen, to then be able to follow that baby's life. And it started like any other day, But I think one of the things that also really reinforced was that, on Project SETI, there's a lot of people who come and work on the boat that are computer scientists and roboticists and people who didn't maybe keep that, like, I love sperm whales from when I was 7. And for them to be there for something like that, but even just to be out and be with the animals, and how much it sort of shifts their perspective in terms of like, oh, I can use all of these skills towards something that's like really, really progressive in terms of the ecosystem or conservation biology, or like what kind of robots does the ocean need? That was pretty amazing for them to sort of understand the gravitas of being present during the birth of a baby sperm whale. Was pretty unbelievable. I think everyone was so deeply grateful and humbled by being there. Yeah, so I mean, that was pretty, I think there's no way that we top that, but go world. I mean, the ocean is a big place. But I think there's a lot of little stories with individual whales that we've known for a long time, or where you kind of peel back what the science can say and say, oh, okay, well, that's what we just saw there is our science 10 years from now. Like animals clearly making decisions about where to move, or animals realizing how our science works and kind of predicting what's going to happen next, and then showing up, and rather than echolocating on the boat, which is on their side of the surface, they would roll their eyes out of the water and look at us on the boat, and like you could see the whale following the people. So to me, that means there's so much more going on in who a sperm whale is, and certainly from the birth, the level of activity, it's pretty hard not to ascribe the word joy there. I think one of the outstanding questions, whether we get at it from understanding what their communication is about this internal who whales are. I think that's the most powerful part of the science that we've been doing for a while now. Is it's not just about what whales do; it's about who they are, and for that, I'm really grateful to have spent this huge amount of time with them.
That's really special. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
You brought up the whale eye tracking people on the boat, and one of my favorite photos anybody posts anywhere is cetacean eyes, whale eyes, and I saw dolphin eye recently, and I was like, okay, that fits the bill too. There is something very otherworldly about cetacean eyes that is just absolutely captivating. I'm kind of obsessed.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, eyes are extremely powerful emotively, right? The gateway to the soul, they're all of these things, but also in terms of being smart. Dogs will point with their eyes in the way that basically no other primate does. And they learned that from spending a huge amount of time with humans, And the same with just go through your day and see how often you look at people in the eye. It's like a very meaningful thing when you spend a lot of time looking at someone in their eyeball. For an animal that's the size of a school bus and their eyeball is just a little thing on the side, it's easy to sort of miss it, But yeah, undoubtedly there's lots going on behind it.
Fascinating. At the end of each episode, I like to leave my audience with a conservation ask to go forth and bring into the world. What would you like my audience to take from your episode today?
Yeah, I mean, undoubtedly, there's lots of little things people can do, and many people have heard things of, reducing your plastics or trying not to burn fossil fuels, and those are all great. But I think the big thing that I hope SETI brings to the table is that this is a really big world, and we need to build bigger definitions of us, more inclusive groups, whether that includes sperm whales or just other humans, and that's going to take everyone paying attention. My mom always used to say, if you're not outraged, you're not paying attention. And so really it's about being engaged. I'm a scientist, but I'm also an advocate for the animals that I work with. And there are groups in your neighborhood, whether it's about a river in your backyard or a turtle you don't even know is there. There's a field naturalist club, whether it's political or not. But to really be engaged, know who the decision makers are who are protecting the squirrel in your backyard, and email them. Yeah. And see what they think about matters to conservation in your neighborhood. Because the oceans might be far away for a lot of people, and certainly the sperm whales in Dominica are going to be far away for many of us. But there's so many conservation things that matter, whether it's wildlife or urban animals that are probably happening in your city. And if you don't know what they are, find out.
It's a great ask. If the audience wants to find you, connect with you, learn more about you, Sperm Whale Project, Project SETI, where's the best place to do so?
The internet. You can go to ShaneGero.com or ProjectSETI.org or thespermwhaleproject.org, and we're all reachable there. We're on social media and all the fun ways as well. But if you go to Shane Gero, I think you can actually email me. God forbid. Straight from the website.
Perfect. Well, I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Well, Shane, thank you so much for hopping on the call today and chatting. It was really great to connect with you.
It was my pleasure. Thanks so much.
Have you heard about my free program, Back to Nature? Getting outside is vital to our health and the health of our planet. The cool part is, to reap the benefits, you only need a few minutes a day. This course is designed to be fun and easy to do, and perhaps spark an adventure or two. Click the link in the show notes to get started today, or visit karagracemusia.com. Thank you for listening to today's show. I'd love to hear any insight you've gleaned. Leave a comment in the show notes or send me an email over at karagracemusia.com. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and, of course, share with your friends. If you want more resources for creating a life of purpose and meaning, plus personal insight from me that I just don't share anywhere else, join me at karagracemusia.com and sign up for email updates. Keep after your dreams and making waves in your community. One person can make a difference. Thanks so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time on the So You Want to Be a Marine Biologist podcast.